If this is the first time we've met, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. There are always a few stories that really rise to the top, and they really give me pause enough to contemplate concern. Now, I try to ignore the chatter, the talking points, the catchy sound bites, and all the sensationalism that we're often fed on a daily basis to try to really look at the news that will directly impact me and understand why prices are rising and why the weather is just plain awful. I also try to look at the big picture. While the area that I live in here in Southern California is in the middle of a massive prolonged heat wave, and literally moments right before I started recording this video, I got a warning to cut back power. Wildfires have begun to sprung up in earnest, and it's always notable to try and understand how the problems that are occurring in China, Russia, Europe, and even Kentucky can have an impact on supply chains and policy. Here's the news that really piqued my interest this week: how it will impact our lives in the future and whether we should be concerned and what we as preppers might want to do at this time. Energy squeeze. The big headline at the moment is OPEC Plus. They're making small trims to the world oil supplies as the prices of oil falls. This one has some nefarious things behind the scenes, so let's try to deconstruct it a bit. That plus in OPEC Plus, it represents nations aligned and acting with OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries. We tend to really only think of the most significant Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, but it's really Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Angola, Venezuela, Ecuador, Indonesia, and the Republic of Congo, and then another 13 member countries. Economists have characterized OPEC Plus as a textbook example of a cartel that cooperates to reduce market competition, but one whose consultants are protected by the doctrine of state immunity under international law. Now, this recent cut to bolster profits by reducing output during a global recession is supported and includes Russia coordinating their scale back in lockstep with OPEC+. Now, to be perfectly clear, Russia is not part of OPEC+. That's just what we predicted can possibly happen here and probably will. There's really a delicate dance that's being played out in Europe right now because of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Many of the recent sanctions against Russia are not set to take effect until the new year. And this is partially so most of Europe can build its Russian oil reserves and take other measures to wean itself off of Russian oil, make it through the harshest part of winter, and secure other foreign oil supplies. Now, for its part, Russia knows that high-priced, low-supplied oil maintains high profits needed to fight the sanctions tolls on their economy, and they use oil as a political policy cudgel on the world stage. Now, in response, the G7 is contemplating putting a price cap on Russian oil to try to combat this influence. Russia could counter by refusing to sell to countries recognizing the price cap. The global war right now is very much about, you guessed it, oil. The next decade is going to be dominated by many profiting off the switch off these fossil fuels to go over to renewable energies, even as this oil war continues. The UK's Hornsea 2 offshore wind farm, it just hit a major milestone of 8.9 gigawatts, and they're ramping up to have another 30 gigawatts by 2030. That's enough to power 22.5 million households. With the passage of recent legislation, U.S. domestic operations will also ramp up their wind farms. It's going to be an interesting future that's a hard right from fossil fuels, and it's still a ways off in the future, though. The reality today is that maintenance parts for a very old grid are in a shortened supply. Demand is up, and production is dropping. Storage capacity is minuscule at best. There are forces at work that will intentionally drive up prices at the pump, even though we all suffer. As a prepper, I encourage you to look at this from the perspective of how it will impact you. I believe the next decade will be a period of transition with a lot of challenges, especially for the grid. I think the only global solution is probably a mix of everything that we have available to us, but I'm more concerned about my own solutions. Here's the thing. Energy is a resource in a prep, just like food and water, and I would encourage you to make sure that you can reduce your dependence on it when rolling blackouts or extended outages occur. It's important to develop some energy resources of your own, whether that's a gas generator, a solar generator, or even a whole home battery backup system. I believe that this situation will likely continue to get worse. Heat wave and drought. At the time of recording this video, the western parts of North America are all in the grips of an unrelenting heat wave, and the Southwest and Central Plains still face a massive multi-decade drought. Meanwhile, we're seeing massive flooding on other parts of the country. What's beginning to pique people's concerns is a genuine threat to our food supply. Ranchers in Texas, they're having significant problems with needing to reduce their herds. That will possibly temporarily lower beef prices as they dump these onto the market, though I wouldn't hold my breath for lower prices to be realized. It will, however, make less beef available in the future. Low supply and high demand, and yada, 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 you know the rest. The rancher's concern, obviously, is that low water and high feed prices will make it hard to even break even on a large herd. If you're a Western gardener, you know the other part of this heat wave and drought. High heat makes it hard for fruits to even set and vegetables to survive. I know from my own gardening how challenging getting anything to harvest has been this year. The higher heat and humidity have also increased the insect population, funguses, and blight occurrences. These require consistent watering, stable temperatures, fertilizers, herbicides, and other implements that are needed to try to combat this. But the price of all these items have increased significantly. Imagine when you escalate these problems up to a large-scale commercial food producers. If I'm having problems here, imagine the problems that they're having. We're already seeing some stories asking people to revise their expectations of high harvest yields. If this continues at this rate, we're going to see reports of crop failures in fallowed fields. This summer's drought and high heat, they've already begun to make it bad for things like tomatoes. We covered this last week, corn and cotton. You should expect another horrible year for winter wheat, rice, sorghum, barley, and durum wheat. Farmers are struggling to pivot and adjust fast enough. About the only crops that are still looking okay right now is soybeans. Major agricultural down cycles are bad for consumers, but lethal for smaller nations. That creates global food insecurity. Here's the thing, another year or two of this at the current pace and the food insecurity here in the United States will be a genuine possibility. For some, it's already here. And as a prepper, I would encourage you to make your food and water preps your top priority. Work to become less dependent upon these failing systems and produce at least a portion of what you consume. This is something that I'll be rolling out increasingly over the next year on this channel, discussing gardening and the approaches I'm going to be taking as this becomes more of an issue. Also expect food shortages to become far worse in the coming months. We are far from the traditional production norms and don't look to return to high yields at any time in the foreseeable future. That's just a brutal reality. Be sure to reference my video on building a one-year food storage setup so you can insulate and protect your family. Is democracy in jeopardy? While I personally don't put too much faith in polls, a recent poll caught my attention. Some 64% of respondents indicated that they thought the United States democracy today is threatened. More than half of the respondents felt that political violence across the country would increase. Now, those are significant numbers that go far beyond just mere disillusionment with the government's functioning. Polls don't paint a complete picture, but present some vital warning signs. Other important polls from Gallup, they show that economic confidence is at negative 39. That's actually up from its low in June of 58%. People's approval and favorable view of the unions is also up to 71%. We last saw that high in the 70s during a massive labor movement and recession. Inflation rose to the most important problem facing the nation, with 32% of people indicating that. Polls in Britain also reflect the same new low level of confidence that they have in their government and institutions. The concerning part about these numbers is the overall climate that they indicate as we head into an election season. Further price increases on food, higher gas prices, and a brutally cold winter being forecasted. When people are suffering and they feel like they're being cheated and their leaders don't represent them, small fires of disagreement can become full-blown wildfires of regime change. And I don't know if I would go so far as to say that democracy is threatened, but I will say that we will likely see some unsavory pockets of civil unrest and violence after this November. Will that happen in your neck of the woods where everyone thinks as you do? Probably not, but that doesn't make them less impactful to you. These periods of civil upheaval are a slowing of the labor force and supply chain, even more charged and inflammatory rhetoric, even further divides, and even potential vigilantism. The government response tends to be either handouts or handbacks to the people, or military security and government overreach. Depending on your area, that also depends on what you will probably get. Here's the thing, as a prepper, make sure your personal security is in place. Make sure you know the hot zones of potential conflict around you and keep an eye on the climate around you as well. Political violence will probably continue to rise before it subsides, and we may have passed the point of rationality with the loss of any compromise. Rich preppers. There's a recent story this week that's making the rounds about the rich and their prepping plans. I'm going to link to it below in the comments. Stories like this, they tend to pique people's interest because we try to look at the rich and their success in predicting future trends. We hope that if we can understand what they're thinking about and spending their money on, that we will somehow be able to leverage that gleaned knowledge to our own advantage. Perhaps we can do that at a level that will allow us to rise to their ranks. Follow the money, as they say. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a millionaire or a billionaire. I'm not going to be able to escape into some metaverse of silicon wafers, another planet, or be whisked away on my private jet to my island bunker. It does raise questions about the us versus them mentality leading up to and following a disaster of any kind. It's one thing when you see individuals share a sharp word or two with a toilet paper hoarder buying up the store's inventory like we saw a few years back. But it's also a problem of a different sort when people are fighting over scraps of food. Should you be more worried about the marauding masses, the lockdown resources of the rich, or the moral dilemma posed by the mother with a hungry baby in arms who shows up at your doorsteps? Should you be more worried about the prepper next door stocking up on more ammo than food because that guy is planning on a future of taking from you? An interesting part of the article is about America Heritage Farms. It's a safe haven, sustainable farm concept to provide the rich a means of food production and security after a society collapsing event. There are no investors in it as of yet. The owner has been unable to convince any of the uber rich to invest in his scheme. And that's probably because affluent preppers think about escaping rather than enduring and sustaining themselves through a collapse to reconstruction period. For the majority of preppers, escaping isn't really an option for most of us. So when I see articles like this, I'm reminded that my prepping mindset really needs to be focused on security and sustaining myself and my family and extended group over a long haul. Prepping now helps me and my community to be less acceptable to total collapses and failures. Imagine if everyone in your community had just 3 days, we're talking bare minimum, 3 days worth of food and water preps on hand. The same disaster could strike your community and a neighboring community, and your community probably wouldn't even record it as a disaster. But the unprepared community, however, would utterly collapse. There's a lot to contemplate with this one, and watch for a coming video that we're going to release shortly on the channel about what the ultra wealthy are doing right now to prepare for the future. For now, that's the major news that I'm tracking this week. Let me know in the comments section below if there's something big that I should be covering or delving deeper into for you. As always, stay safe out there.